Let's start at the very basic. I mean, Project Spearhead. We see your name associated with this, but I mean, this is a multifaceted thing. There's a lot going on. So when people ask you what exactly is Project Spearhead, how do you define that to them?
Project Spearhead is not an association or a union. All it is right now is an investigation to find out the status of UFC fighters so that we can make an intelligent decision as to the best way to impact our future. So Project Spearhead, the goal is to collect authorization cards so that we can hand them to the National Labor Relations Board, and they will, after we show that interest, they will look at the cards, verify them without ever telling the UFC who the people who have signed cards are. They'll get a list of all the fighters and they will review it, and so the UFC will never know who has signed the card. It's a completely confidential process. And once they've verified that we have 30% of the roster has signed, then they will look at its 11 pieces of criteria. They will determine based on that whether or not we're independent contractors or employees. And if we're employees, then we'll be able to unionize. Then we'll be able to collectively bargain for things like minimums and I mean, pension, insurance, actual medical insurance instead of liability insurance, post-fight medical care, as in, and I say post-fight, I mean post-career medical care, retirements, pensions, revenue sharing, a grievance policy, all kinds of wonderful things.
So really, because I think that's what I think everybody has kind of been a little bit scared of, right? Is a union association? What's the right method? People that want to at least explore this option don't even really need to know that yet, right? Like they don't have to have in mind exactly what the next best step is.
Right, and there have been some wonderful interviews by Kajan Johnson, the vice president of Project Spearhead, and he thinks that an association route is going to be the better route, not just for UFC fighters, but for all of MMA. And I totally respect that. We have a different perspective, but I mean, I respect him and I respect his educated perspective. And I think that the union is going to be the best way to get everything for all the fighters. But there's absolutely no point in arguing about that or really dividing any of the fighters or anybody who has an interest in helping the fighters along the lines of union or association, because we don't even know. So the whole point is to unify the people who want to organize the fighters, and the very first step is finding out what's the most intelligent step. Like this is an information gathering stage. And so in the gathering information, we just need to find out what our options are, and that's what signing the cards is going to enable us to do.
You've been, outspoken with other efforts as well, right? I mean, you want this to happen, but you're finding the right venue, I guess the right vein to do it is important. Why is this one right now the one that you're saying, this is where my chips are right now, this is the one I'm betting on?
Well, the other efforts have not been fighter-driven or fighter-led. They have had outside interests who have either represented them or been behind them, been driving them, and so now this is a totally fighter-driven, fighter-led grassroots organization. There's nobody else who has an agenda inside of this. There is no chance for anybody else to make bank off of this or to use the fighters as pawns. The fighters have been used as pawns by so many people, and it's time for that to stop. And that's what Project Spearhead is about. It's about putting the fighters in the driver's seat of where this can all go.
So there's no, because I wondered that as well. I mean, there are no attorneys or somebody that's gonna make quite a bit of money if this all goes forward. Because that's what I always wondered about the other efforts as well. Like it did seem like they had some good intentions, but then you start talking about like how the financials were gonna work, and you're like, oh, okay, now I understand your motivation because you're gonna make money off this. I mean, are there attorneys or people that are helping you organize that have some financial vesting in this?
Well, first I will speak that it's not wrong for people to do things because they want to make money. Like, that's why most people do things, and that's fine. I understand it, and that's a good thing. The problem is that a lot of people want to make money so badly that they are willing to use or abuse the other people in the process of making that money. So Project Spearhead, we have been, man, Lucas Middlebrook is the labor lawyer who has done everything pro bono. He is not guaranteed a position. So that's another thing. Here, I'll speak to this, and then I want to share something else about the whole process, which is that Lucas Middlebrook is the labor lawyer involved in Project Spearhead, but he just likes helping people who have been bullied. That's been his thing. He is a labor lawyer, and he works outside of Project Spearhead. He has a real job, helping the little guy not get stood on by bullies. And that's why I'm reluctant to say plight of the UFC fighters, because that gives me a visual of like a poor bird or something like that needs help. And you know, no fighter wants to see themselves as someone who's struggling or having problems, because, you know, look strong, act strong, and be strong. But he sees the way that UFC fighters have been bullied, and he wants to help it, and he wants to make a difference. And so we're super grateful to him for everything that he's done. But that being said, once the cards are signed and we are determined to be employees or independent contractors, if we're determined to be employees, then Project Spearhead is not automatically the union. If we are determined to be employees, we have to have an election to elect a union. And there's no guarantee who's going to win the election. Like, any geek off the streets can just show up and start a union and become elected. There's no guarantee that I am going to be president. In fact, I kind of think that it makes the most sense to have an active fighter at the helm. There's no guarantee and that's kind of the reason I say that is because I am about to fight the last fight on my contract. I'm an independent contractor. The UFC has no obligation to sign me again to renegotiate a contract with me. So there is a very real possibility that this upcoming fight will be my last fight with the UFC, which is a bummer because I love fighting for the UFC. I love fighting for the fans. I love stepping into the octagon, and I like the lifestyle. I love my peers. Like it's what I love to do, but I feel like this is more important, and I'm not going to make the maybe smarter decision of staying quiet or backing down on any of the Project Spearhead stuff so that I can have a longer UFC career. So there's going to be an election. Anybody can be elected. There's no guarantee that Lucas will become the council or that I will even be on the board. It'll be anybody who shows themselves to the UFC fighters to be the most intelligent, responsible, and productive choice to lead the fighters.
So knowing all that, everything that you just said, I mean, that maybe this is your last fight. Like, why is this so important to you, right? I mean, like, why do you want to go through this knowing that there may be personal sacrifice to yourself, knowing that, I mean, I don't know how labor laws would work, but let's say this was your last fight and then everything's ratified. Maybe it only impacts people like from that moment forward. Like maybe you go through all this and you never even get any benefit out of it. Why would you as a person make this decision and take those risks? And I mean, is it charity that you're putting everybody else in front? I mean, just what I wonder what's the motivation?
It's not charity. At the risk of sounding like I'm virtue signaling, it makes everything better to do something and know that it's going to affect more people than just oneself. I guess I've always wanted to think that I was the kind of person who would be able to make a sacrifice for the greater good, but whoever really knows until they have that opportunity. And so I guess I'm kind of happy that I actually have that opportunity. Hopefully it's not a sacrifice. Hopefully I win this fight, get a knockout of the night bonus, get re-signed again for some nice number. We get the Project Spearhead instated. Not instated. By the way, if it actually did come down to being a union, they would totally need to choose a new name. It's only called Project Spearhead because we're trying to start the whole thing. That's the only reason why. I don't know. There's just, man, fighters are amazing. Like, it's such a weird thing being an MMA fighter in the UFC because I share a lot of very similar lifestyle, very similar experiences with these other fighters who have teams and they go through the same experiences, similar experiences on their teams and through their life, and especially the other fighters in my weight class, the other women. But I can't make friends with them because I want to fight them, and that's a little cognitive dissonance for me, at least. So I guess this is my way of showing my respect and appreciation to everybody that I've gotten to fight with.
It's interesting because I talked to Ashton earlier today, and I'm like, have you talked to Leslie at all about, the stuff that's going on in Project Spearhead? And she's like, well, no. I'm like, well, will you after? She's like, well, maybe I'll talk to her afterwards, but it seems weird to, like, you're kind of trying to help people, but then at the same time, like, you're trying to, get in the cage and punch their face in. So, I mean, is that difficult at all? I mean, you're trying to do things, but as you said, this is a very singular, competitive, alpha type sport.
Yeah, it totally is. I have actually, since I've had this as a goal of mine to be a part and to do as much as I can to help unify the fighters. And when I say unify the fighters, I'm not trying to get everyone to hang out and like go to movie nights together. Like, it's not like I picture the whole roster going bowling together and like cheersing or anything like that, But everybody has similar issues. Eventually everybody gets cut, and eventually everybody's best interests are not identical to those of the UFC. And that's when everyone's problems come. And that's what everyone's guaranteed to go through at some point or another. And so when I say organize and unify the fighters, I'm talking about organizing them just to the point where we can make sure that we're not going to have to go through all these exact same issues that we can avoid. And if I don't want to go through it, I don't want to have to watch somebody else going through it. If I'm watching somebody else going through it and I'm like, man, that sucks for them, like, why would I just sit on my hands and be like, wonder when that's going to happen to me? And it's lacking foresight. And it's very naive to think that the issues that everybody else is going through are not going to happen to each and every single one of us, because they are. It's guaranteed.
Well, there's a handful that don't, right? Like the Conor McGregors of the world, the George St. Pierres of the world, right? I mean, they kind of, not that they haven't earned that themselves, but they kind of live above the need of everybody else, right? I mean, so can something like this work? Because I think 95% or more of the rank and file, contractors, employees of the UFC, this is beneficial. Do you have to have the Conor McGregors, the George St. Pierres, the ultra level superstars, do they have to be on board with this? Because I could see them saying, what do I need that for? My life's pretty damn good.
Yeah, no, we don't need them. We only need 30% of the roster for this first step to happen. And then after that, we only need the majority of the people who vote in order to get a union in place. And if we don't become a union, then there's going to be other avenues to figure it out as an organization. So no, we don't need any individual. Burt Watson, you smiled at that name. Mm-hmm. Everyone smiles at that name. I still hear his voice. You know, I started in 2014, but so I didn't get to spend as much time around him as everybody else did, who was around for longer than I was, but I still hear his voice in all kinds of situations, and he would say things like, if it's in here, you know, you got to put it here, like say it out loud, and he would say that no individual fighter is bigger than the sport. There is no one person who means everything to MMA, who's going to make or break MMA. And it's true. Like, anybody can come and go. The sport is going to be there for longer. And that's what the most important thing is, the sport.
What's the key right now? Right now it's just the getting the card signed, right? I mean, is the key just still education? And I mean, what is the hesitation? What's the response been like so far? What's the hesitation, and what's the key to keep it growing right now?
Well, first off, we are on track to hit our goal, which is great. We had our first card was signed on February 12th, and we are on track with cards collected to hit our goal well before February 12th. So it's going to happen, and that's a wonderful thing. But it would be nice if there was an absence of reluctance, because there is still some reluctance. And what the reluctance is usually based on is people saying, well, the UFC hasn't screwed me over yet. Or maybe not even that language. I'm thinking of specific messages that I've gotten from people. More like, the UFC has treated me very nice so far. And you mentioned a second ago that, you know, Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, talking about, you didn't say Rousey, but, you know, there's people who are the 1% in MMA. And everybody thinks that they're going to be the 1% in MMA. That's why we're all here. That's the only reason somebody would be crazy enough to train their ass off without getting paid for any of the training, pay money to fight. We pay over $1,000. I paid over $1,000 for my medicals. I paid hundreds of, maybe a grand total of 100 and some for the licensing fees for me and all my corners. I paid hundreds, maybe even thousands, not thousands, but over 1,000 for getting my team out here, for bringing the additional corners, for getting the rooms on top of the flights. Like, I'm paying money in order to be able to do this, and so is everybody else. And it's because we all believe that we are that special one, that 1%, and this is going to be our chance to show it. And after this fight, everyone's going to know that they should all be buying stock in me because I'm freaking amazing. Like, we have to have that mentality, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's great. But the reality is that we need to collectively bargain, because except for the 1%, we're all the 99%.
Is there anything that's lost by pursuing, like, becoming a union, becoming an association, whatever it is, right? Is there anything that's lost? I mean, are there negatives? Are there drawbacks? I mean, it seems like collective bargaining makes sense, right? I mean, you're talking about contracts, you're talking about I mean, all these things that you guys should have a say in, you would have a say in. But are there any setbacks, like for those 1%, would their earnings be capped? Or, I mean, are there any drawbacks that you can think of?
I can't think of any drawbacks right now. We're not a league, so there's no reason that someone's earnings would be capped. It's not a pie, so there's no reason to think that because the guys on the bottom are going to get more, that the guys on top are going to get less. Like, it's not a finite source of resources that we're pulling from. And the sooner that we solve the labor issues, because I believe that that's what it is it's a labor issue. Even if me and Cajun Johnson and Ally Quinta and Chris Cyborg recently came out to support the Project Spearhead, even if we're some of the only people who are talking about it, like, it's still an issue. There's still problems. Everybody is still going through dealing with not getting paid enough. They're unhappy with their contracts. They're unhappy with the representation. They're not satisfied with the level of respect or their excuse me, or their care from the UFC. So once all those issues get signed, then we are going to be able to have a more respected sport, a wider fan base, and everybody makes more. The promotion is going to make more. I strongly believe that by forming a collective bargaining body inside of the UFC, setting a new standard for care of MMA fighters, is going to allow the UFC to reach a wider audience than it ever has before, and actually start to rival the income of the other major sports: baseball, hockey, soccer, football. And that it starts by taking care of inside of the company.
That's interesting, because that's what I was going to ask, if there's like a, maybe sometimes I'm naive about things, or maybe I just try to look at things too positively, but I mean, is there any way to present this to the UFC where it's like, listen, we're not trying to combat you here, we're not digging sides, and this is not going to be some battle, like, this can benefit you too?
Yeah, and I have tried to say that, I've tried to share that. I haven't actually had meetings with anybody, I haven't actually sat down with anyone, because this isn't something like, why would they just call us employees when they can get away with calling us independent contractors? I mean, I guess maybe that's a good question. Maybe I'll go to the press conference and ask. It's a great idea, actually. Thank you. But in general, the people in power don't just hand out their power and give other people the opportunities to make more of the money that they think they should be making. So, no, I haven't sat down with anybody yet, but the idea is that once we have enough people and there's enough reason for whatever, there's no I know where I'm at. I mean, I'm ranked in the top 10. I'm ranked in the top 10 of women's bantamweights in the UFC, in the world. I've got 8 fights in the UFC. This is going to be my 8th fight in the UFC. I'm legit as a fighter, like, on my own. Even though I'm fighting on Fight Pass for, like, the millionth time. I'm the Fight Pass main event. Like, I'm a good fighter, and being in the top 10 of the UFC is freaking legit. Like, that's a big deal. And so even though I am respectable, and it'd be wonderful to think that people should listen to me just on the merit of what I'm saying, and based on my track record and what I've accomplished, there's not a major reason for the UFC to listen to me or really any other individual. Because as long as we're only speaking as individuals, then there's always another fighter who can come up and take the spot. As long as it's just an individual person saying something, there's always going to be another person, and they're always going to be disposable. And so that's why we need to get everyone together on the same page. Not on everything, like I said, we don't have to go bowling together, like, we don't all have to be buddy-buddy or, like, we don't even have to smile at each other. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine. We want to hate each other, like, somewhere, or, like, let the animosity from the world get channeled at whoever it is that we're going to fight next, or, like, my team versus the world. Whatever somebody wants to do, like, that's fine. We can keep doing it. But we need to make sure that we're speaking together. And so once I have enough people who are, like, willing to say, yeah, we agree, we want these things, we are all susceptible to the same issues, and we're smart enough to see what could happen, and we're going to take the steps to prevent it. So let's all speak with the same voice. Then yes, then I am going to go to the UFC.
Perfect world, though. I mean, you said there's a risk this could be your last fight. I mean, I gotta imagine this is tough, like getting ready for a fight and dealing with all the things that go on. So would it be easier for you in some stretch for them to say, you know what, we don't need your services anymore, and then you can focus, full time on this? Or is perfect world for you to you keep your fighting career, you keep competing in the UFC, and you keep balancing, your fighting career and this effort?
I want to keep fighting. I'd love to keep fighting. I like fighting. Fighting is what gets me up in the morning and makes me excited about going out and about. Fighting is what has brought me self-respect and the ability to interact with other people on the level that I want to interact with other people. I wasn't a very healthy person before I started fighting. Like, I didn't graduate high school. I was on tons of drugs. I went to rehab. Like, I didn't even go back to school. I got a 2-year degree from a community college when I was like 24, 25. Like, I started going back to school and being responsible at the same time as I started fighting. And I think that it's only because of fighting that I was able to do any of that, because of the self-discipline needed for it, and the humility and the reality. Like, in the other parts of life that I've experienced, you could fuck up again and again and again. You can just keep making the same mistake and you might not even realize it. But in fighting, if I keep making the same mistake, like, it's gonna get more and more significant every time. I'm gonna realize it, and I'm gonna stop making that mistake. Like, the system is set up like that, where like you kind of have to learn from it. And so I would love to keep on fighting. That would be wonderful. And also, that's the reason I have a voice. Like, I appreciate the UFC for bringing MMA to the mainstream, for making it this publicly appreciated and world-renowned sport. And I want to keep going with that. Like, I'm not confused. I know that I have this platform because of fighting. I'm not angry at fighting. I'm not trying to get away from it. Like, I would like to go back to school. I would like to study all kinds of wonderful things. It'd be awesome to be able to rejoin this, I don't want to call it a fight, because like I said, I'm not calling it combative to the UFC, but it would be awesome to rejoin this effort in another capacity, from a more educated capacity. But I know that the reason that why I say anything right now matters is because of the opportunities that the UFC has given me to fight.
So I guess the message right now to other fighters, I mean, we know you've been pushing it out on social media and all that, but I guess is the message you want to get across to other fighters right now is just sign these cards. I mean, let's see what can happen, because from what I know, it doesn't seem like there's, again, any harm in at least signing the card and exploring the option, because as far as I can tell, the UFC never knows. Like, even if I mean, it's not like a court record. Can it be made public? I don't know, but it seems to me like there's really no harm whatsoever. And I hate to be too opinionated. I'm just reporting on it. But from what I gather, like, just exploring, it seems like there's nothing. Like, there's no reason not to.
Yeah, you're totally right. There's no reason not to sign a card. None. The UFC will never know. Ever. They'll never know who has signed a card and who hasn't signed a card. Look, if you're a fighter and you want me to, like, pretend like you, like, said no, like, we can do a whole dialogue on Twitter. You can be like, no, I don't believe in unions. And then, like, behind the scenes, like, we can do a card thing. Like, if you want, like, just let me know. Like, we can do it. We can make it happen. But yeah, there's no reason not to sign a card right now, because the UFC is never going to know who signed, and it doesn't sign anyone up for dues. It doesn't put anyone else in charge of you. It's not creating any kind of situation where power is being given away to someone new. And I think that that's one of the biggest worries, is that the UFC is a known evil. That's a bad way to phrase it, huh? But it is. It is. Anytime that there's someone who has authority over you in whatever way, shape, or form, maybe that's just my mentality. That's, you know, a known evil. As opposed to going out into the unknown and, like, what's going to happen? Like, is someone else going to try to take advantage or something like that? And in the U.S., there's a lot of anti-union propaganda, because there's a lot of major corporations who have spent billions of dollars to pay other corporations whose entire job is to create and share anti-union propaganda. I mean, just Google the Walmart anti-union videos. Like, that's not it. Like, there's more of them out there. Like, the UFC hired a company to combat union efforts years ago. In, like, 2014, they were sending out letters like, be careful, someone's going to try to get you to unionize. And unions are the strongest when they are first started because they're representing the needs and desires and wants of their constituents. There have been cases where unions stop speaking to the needs of the people they're representing. And that usually happens when it's a very well-established union that's been around for a while and people get money hungry. But we have written the Constitution and bylaws for Project Spearhead in such a way that if the association ever stops serving the interests of the fighters, then it needs to be disbanded. That's
interesting. I mean, I don't want to look at this from a negative perspective, but let's say February 12th comes around and you don't have the 30%. It's not done. What does that mean for this effort moving forward? I mean, is this like, it's just never going to happen? Or is it like, okay, now we've got to restart and reset? I mean, what does that mean? If this effort doesn't get the 30%, what does that mean moving forward?
If this doesn't work, then it's just another page in the educational booklet about how to make it happen next time. There's that saying of fall down 7 times, get back up 8. And, you know, the basketball player, I should know exactly who it is. Is it Michael Jordan? Who talks about how he, like, missed millions of shots. I should know quotes better if I'm going to use them. But, you know, anybody who's successful says that the reason that they're successful is because they failed so many times. And I have faith that UFC fighters period, MMA fighters in general, are smart enough and dedicated enough and resilient enough to eventually, they will take control of their lives and stop being a pawn of anybody.